Thank you for joining the Red Team Village at ActivityCon today. Our next speaker is Akshant, and they will be covering the attack surface of Android applications. Don't forget to join us in our channel on the HackerOne Discord server.
Hello everyone, welcome to my talk on attack surface for Android applications. So let's start. A bit about me. My name is Akshant Jaiswal. Currently I work as a security engineer at CRED. I focus on areas on web and mobile application security, and in my free time I love to hunt for bugs on bug bounty platforms. So moving for agenda for today. So first we are going to talk about Android components. So to give our viewers or the audience, even who are new, right, to give an idea what are the components of Android, like what do they mean and how do they perform actions, or what are their roles in an application. So we'll focus and walk through that. These will not be a very brief or very in-depth explanation for each component, but and just an overall explanation. So ev- uh, like even new people can get an idea from that. Then on each component, right, we'll also talk on vulnerabilities. So on each component, what exactly vulnerability or what security issues can come, we'll talk on that. And then we'll move to attack canaries. So basically, even when one founds an vulnerability, right, or a security issue in an application, right, how can basically they exploit it. So how can they reach or trigger a point to actually being able to exploit from let's say a remote user or from a malicious app. So we'll see on that. And in the final section we'll talk on the exploits, as in we'll see live demos through our vulnerable application, and we'll see explanation and demos for all of the discussed vulnerabilities. So before even starting, right, let's talk on what overall impact an Android application code side vulnerabilities can be. So as we know, right, like for a web application, people can expect that there might be server side vulnerabilities, or even in client side there are vulnerabilities. But in case of Android, right, there is slight bit difference. Like there are issues, but those are different, right? So let's talk on what impact can we create. So the first major thing that an application holds is your data. So this data is not limited to only your session or let's say your authorization token, but also your files that are stored in the private directories or in the private location in the application itself. These can be in various form, which we are going to talk about later in the talk. Next, we can steal data for cross app communication. So modern day apps are not only limited to the self communication, as you see, right. uh, Once example of a shopping application, once you move to shopping and you select buy now, it may be like you might be redirected to other application to complete the payment and come back. So that is an example of cross app communication. But can we create an impact here, as in can we steal data from there? We'll talk on that. And finally, like execute code or actions on behalf. So by code, what I mean basically, there are third party libraries or even SDKs, right? They load native code. So these native code also run from the application. So if an attacker is able to run their malicious code, right, by finding a flaw in the application itself, so they can perform an code execution also. Also via deep links and things, people can execute CSRF attacks also. One of the famous examples of this is a HackerOne report that was sent on to Twitter. So basically the user can execute actions from using the deep link and create a good impact. Now let's start with Android components. So as I said earlier, like these will not be an in-depth explanation for all the components, but just only components like which will need to understand from a perspective of vulnerability and demo. So let's start with the first four most basic components. So the first one is activity. So activity, assume activity is the basic entry point for a user to interact with an app. So let's take an example of Gmail. So when you open Gmail, right, this is the first thing that you see either slide a mails, you can slide through the mails. So that is an activity. Now when you click on this, an activity transition takes place and you move to other activities. So that's an activity. Coming to service, so uh, service as a component that basically runs or allows you to run the task in the background. So assume the mp3 player or even the downloads that are going in background when you even close the app. So those are examples of service. Third is broadcast listener. So broadcast listener allows you to deliver messages to your app to perform certain action. Example is the alarm apps basically that you see. Now finally, content providers. Basically using content providers you can manage your data for your application, as in let's say you want to share a file to other application, or you want to send a file to other application. You can do all these actions using content provider. Now let's look at manifest. So manifest is like a metadata, or assume it as an information source for the system. So using manifest, the system reads, okay, what are the components that will be in app, what will the first application that I need to launch, all those information, the permissions that we have, right? All this information uh, for the Android system to know, like, okay, this is application, what is named, these kind of things, right? So these we get from this manifest. So just an example, as first we can see permission. So like what this application would use permission for, then just a overview of this application, basic things about this. Then we have, as we explained in earlier slide, right, activity, uh, its details, service, about its details, similarly service and content provider. Now we'll also talk on some of these in later point of slide. Now moving to one of the most major components of an Android application is an intent. So intents basically help to communicate or trigger or action between other components of Android. So let's say you are on a screen, right, and you want to move to other activity, or let's say you want to activate a notification, or even like start a service in background. So intents can help you there. So assume intents as a helper to your application. Now let's see the structure for an intent. So basically when uh, we have to start a specific component, right, we can tell intents like, okay, you need to start this specific components. We can do that by setting from this example like intent.set component and component name. Now action. So action basically tells what the intent will do basically. So like if action is view, like the task will be to display. If action is send, it will be used for sending files and things like that. Now data. So basically data part in an intent will define you the scheme, host part, or the MIME type. So it, in major cases you will see it as a definition for deep link like in an intent filter, or it can be defining you a MIME type. Example, if you want to send an image, right, so you can see like in data part like what will be MIME type of this. Now coming to category. So category basically tells your intent like what will be the nature for this. Example, if the category is launcher, right, this will be the first point of interaction. As you see a splash screen, right, you see a slider or things like that. Or let's say example, when you open YouTube, right, you see a YouTube play button thing and that slides off. So that is a example of launcher. So next is extras. Basically extras add extra information to your intent. Let's say example, you want to start an activity, right, you want to move to a new segment in an activity and you want to pass some data. Okay, hey activity, open this another activity and I want you to tell him this data is being transitioned to him. So in extras you can pass on that data. So also see, let's see an example for this. Yeah, so also where we have also types of intent. Example, explicit and implicit intent. So in explicit intents we already define what your new place or new task will be. So in this example we see that for open app intent, right, we have already defined the new activity or the new class that it will go. So we already define, but for an implicit intent, right, we do not name this intent. Basically we don't give pass the class or name, but we tell him an action. So example, we'll tell the intent, your action is to view, and we'll pass some data. So any application which have declared this action in their manifest as in I can handle this, so intent or the application system will allow it to handle. So example will can be a share button. So when you see clicking on a share button, right, you see a lot of application, they open and you can select an application. So assume implicit intent that. One more example from manifest and activity point of view as well. So as you see example for a explicit intent. So in action we defined we have defined the name already. Okay, you will fetch from this, the category is default, and we have already defined, okay, this intent will be directed to this class. Now moving to implicit, we have only here defined what will be action as in view. So here a proper class was defined, but here only a view action is defined. So as you can might have already noticed that we have not actually told in an implicit intent where you are going, right? So this can be insecure in some ways, as in if you are sending something sensitive and you only want one app to access, but you have not properly defined or restricted this action, so this can be abused in that way. Now moving to vulnerabilities, this is an example from oversecure.com. So in an on create method, basically there is an intent passed and there is no check on what values it has taken. What basically set result is doing is, if the intent is passed, right, it will perform the action. So example for an exploit is basically in a malicious app, you create a new intent, you pass the data to the secret application, secret file, and then you set flag for flag grant read URI permission. Basically it will grant one time access to read this file. Now you set this file this class name and you start the intent. So basically set result will resolve this activity that is passed from malicious application, and it will also send the result back. So on activity result will pass the intent, and while getting the results back, the application can actually read the file. So this was a secret file that was saved in the application, but because before set result there is no validation happening as such, what is the data, or even get intent, what exactly data that I want to pass, there is no check. So direct intent is being executed, and any application can steal data out of it. Now moving to second vulnerability, that is no validation on the caller for intent. So first we'll see an insecure way. So assume it as an exported activity, so any application can open it. So it is taking an intent, it is taking the file parameter, it is taking address where to return it to, then it is parsing the file, like getting the content of, okay, for the file name what is the content, and it is sending the result back. So there is no check on who is actually calling this. It is either my app or is it a malicious application. So a secure way to do is like before even getting in this loop, right, we can set an if condition to check if get calling activity or the package name for my application or the signature, even below, before this or after this, we can add a signature check. Okay, the application only which I want is calling this, that is my application. Now moving to the storage mechanism in Android application. So an application, as we earlier said, right, not only store a database, but it also store files, images that the application wants to be private with itself only. Example are like databases, images, and cookies, things like this. Now let's see a distribution for this. So storing files on Android are majorly divided in two forms. First will be private and second one will be public. So by private I mean only an application or only the application can access this. Other application won't be able to access it directly. And the second is public storage, which is basically uh, uh, this has been access this the access is public for this, and applications can see data from this. So this will be an external storage, but this will be a private storage to app. So first let's see the directory. So all these files are saved under data package and the directory which you will call. Also a symlink, right? So if you see there is also a symlink created to this, that is data user 0 package and directory. These both refers to same like data package directory. Now this we can divide in on and two forms as well. First will be databases, that is again saved under your package, and directory can be databases or something depending how your application is built into. Other is shared preferences. So an example like if your application uses JWT token, right, you will want to save it in a shared preferences. So like while launching the application you can check if shared preferences has data, and you can validate it server side. And apart from these we have files and other private things stored as well. And an example of shared storage can be as we see in gaming application, right, we have OBB files and these files, right. So these are generally public and these are in shared storage. Now actually how do we access this, like how does one application given given authority to other application to access this? The answer is content provider. So content provider basically allows application to share their data, like even their private data, with other application. Now just a subclass of this content provider, as in file provider is just a subclass, as in let's say you have any file stored in this, right, in your file in your private directory, and you want to share it with other application. So you can use file provider for this. Let's say using content provider you only want to share or read or write your contacts. Example, you want to write contacts or read contacts, you can use content provider for that. But for exchanging of files and reading these, right, we can use file provider. It's much simpler and more secure. Now let's see the setup for this, as how a content provider is defined. So a content provider will be defined in a manifest like using provider tags. You first define give a name to your provider, then an authority. So what an authority is basically, authority is a unique name or a unique identifier. So in all applications, right, each Android content provider will have a different authority name. So they should be unique and should not collide with other names. Now exported, basically if your provider or a content provider is exported, other apps can also access and directly access data from this. We'll talk later on this, but just an overview of like what exported means. So it will open the possibility other apps to query. Then we have URI permissions, as in when if we want our intent, right, to set flags, as in using a provider, what permissions it will have. So setting this to means we are giving read and write permissions on the basis. Now metadata, basically we allow what paths basically a provider should access. So let's see. So this is our definition for this, as in the data provider paths we want. So example, we want our documents and images to be shared. So we can tell the file provider that okay, we want to share only documents and images, and the path will be docs and images. So vulnerabilities. So the first major vulnerability is in making the component exported itself. So basically if you set this as exported or set this exported as true, Basically, this will give access to other apps to call your content provider and query the data from your app, from your internal private directories. Is giving full path access in provider path. So as we have seen, right, we can define paths in what basically a content provider can access. So let's say if we define a root path, right, so it will give me all data access under this. So it will have shared preferences that will store your cookies. It can have libraries and things like that, which you don't want to expose other apps. But if you define root, and if it is not necessary, right, this is a very insecure way in which you are vulnerable. Next, let's talk about web views. So web views basically allows our application to use web pages inside our own application without moving to a browser. So they also allow a rendering of JavaScript. It also allows to open files within your web view. So under circumstances, these are a bit useful, but this can be a bit insecure as well. So a bit about setup. So just to set up, you can use web view by setting it in layout, then simply passing a URL to this. Talking about configs, you can set various flags, as in you can allow JavaScript to render, you can allow files to be rendered, and things like that. And also overriding. Basically, once you have loaded a web page, you want all the links that clicking all the links should also be executed within your application. So you can add should override URL loading function, and it will ensure that web view is loading all the links or all the hrefs inside that web view only, and not moving to other application. Now let's move to the vulnerabilities for this. The first vulnerability is setting of JavaScript enable true. So by this, it's not a vulnerability itself, but if it's not handled properly, it can be dangerous for the application. So let's say if we have set JavaScript enable true for a URL, right, and if we allow the user to control it, like we'll see in exploit section how, but if we allow the user to control this, so basically theft of cookie or execution of JavaScript in various contexts can happen. Second is the host validation bypass. So let's say we are taking a deep link intent, and we are using a URL parameter, right? And what we are doing is checking with start with and end with. So for such kind of validation, we can easily bypass using it backslash and @ characters. There are also major forms of this, like you can use Unicode and such characters, and you can bypass this check, and you can load a malicious or such page inside your application as well. The third is enabling file access in WebView. So set allow file access basically allows you to load example file protocol and any HTML page using that protocol. So let's say you have a malicious HTML page, right? So using this, you can use set allow file access. Also by default, this is not a vulnerability itself, but it can be used as chain, which we'll talk on exploit section. And the second is set allow file access from file URLs. So at start it might be a bit confusing, like they mean the same, but they are actually different. So set allow file access, basically what it does is it allows a file protocol to actually access another file protocol. Example, let's say you are in a desktop application, a desktop Chrome application, and what you do basically is in an HTML page you try to load a file protocol URL, right? So in a desktop application, the Chrome will automatically block this, right? Because HTTP protocol cannot access file protocol. That's a restriction. But in while you set allow file access from file URLs, basically what you give is you allow the file protocol to access another file protocol, and you can make an XHR request. Basically in a HTML page, let's say you load a file URL, right? And that has an XHR call to another file URL. So you can use that basically. We'll see an exploit on this that's very interesting in the later point of slide. Now let's move to the third section, that is attack canaries. So like to actually being able to exploit the application, right, we need to have the ability to invoke the attack, actually to invoke the area where actual vulnerabilities lies. But that might not be possible or possible depending on how the application is set. So we have two scenarios, as in two things. First one is exported activity and second is deep link. So basically an exported activity will allow you to launch the components from cross app as well. So let's say application B has a main activity as exported, right? So application A can invoke this from this app as well. So this can give you a direct access to protected components and things like that, which may be restricted in a normal scenario. So exported activity can be useful in those sense. Coming to deep link, basically, so deep link allows user input, or deep links even allows a normal protocol and a host to enter in application using data paths. So let's say you have defined protocol and host in your application manifest, and you want this deep link to render a page. So using this, basically an attacker can add his URL and pass this to the deep link, and using that, basically the application would render your malicious web page. Now so far we have just seen the theory part of this. So now let's move to the demo section for this. So let's see all of these exploit in our demo application. So for the demo purpose, here we are using an application that is called Worldroid. This is an intentionally vulnerable application. So I'll also link this in the slides as well, and also attach a link later. So let's see what this application is, just an overview. So while coming to the front or the main page, you'll see a login and sign up. Basically you can use sign up to create a new account for you. Just ensure you're using dummy password and not real world passwords. So I've already created an account, so I'll just simply log in. So that logged me in the account. Now we can see various things. So let's move to exploit, because all of them are vulnerable in some or the other form. So moving to our first exploit. So we have an activity that is send message to innocent app. This activity is used basically to send message to other application. It trusts that the secret message will be sent to an application, but there is a flaw in this. To know the flaw, let's move to see the code, like what is exactly happening. So let's open the Worldroid code. We have send message to app, this activity. Let's zoom in. Yeah, now we see we have the function send message. So what we do, we extract the text that we want to send, and we pass it to an action that is com.app.innocent.receive message. So what it's doing here is basically once it has the data, it wants to send it to another app. So it's not actually sending by checking any signature, by checking package name, but it's adding an action. Okay, so any application which will have this receive message action specifically set in their manifest, they can receive this, and then it starts an activity. So let's see the code for the innocent app. So in this manifest, for receiving the message, basically an intent filter is being added, where the action is being declared. Okay, I will receive the message from the worldwide application because I have declared this. But the problem with this is an exploit application can also do the same. So moving to an exploit application, we'll also set the manifest with same intent filter. So here if you see, I have set the same intent filter for this as well. So because it has the same intent filter, once we click on once we type any message, let's say hello secured a message, and we click on the send button, what you will see is basically you will get both options, as in you can get it on exploit application as well as on receive message. So, and as an attacker point of view, what an attacker or a malicious app will do, basically they will rename themselves to the same app name, same launcher favicon or the app favicon. They will set it to same, and because the user will confuse, okay, both are looking same, I can click on anyone, and in this way the message can be received by any of this application. So let's say we click on the exploit application. So once we click on this, right, the message will be received here as well. So as we see, like this is not a very high or critical impactful vulnerability, but because there is no check, there can be a theft for the data as well. Now let's move to our second exploit, which is also a bit interesting. So in application during sign up, we had seen, right, there was an option to request a password reset as well. So let's use that. Here's a flaw as in password reset. Let's see first request a password reset token. Okay, email sent, open email app. So what is being done, as I'm using Firebase, so I'm creating a password reset for the application using this, and what the application will do is, the worldwide application will do, it will load this web view, the Firebase web view inside it, and it will ask the user to reset it. So here there are no vulnerabilities in the activity point of view, but more on the deep link point of view. As in, let's see the manifest. In the manifest, we can see that the activity uses an intent filter. So it uses an intent filter of HTTPS Firebase app. So it expects that any URL with Firebase app, it can handle this. So this is expecting that. So because the intent filter has no Android auto verify check, the system is not sure, okay, this host and scheme which app will handle. So also the malicious application, they can also register the same data filter inside the intent filter, and they can register it as well. So let's see, in worldwide application, we can also register the same. Let's say we create a new activity, that is password steal. We set the same data. So now once we open the email, let's say we open the email application, and as we click on the link, this is Firebase link to reset the token. So as we click on this, we can see there will be two options. So as this priority was this first, we had set in the manifest, it got first, and the same way, right, as the earlier, like I can set the same favicon, same link, and if I click here, right, as you see, the password reset token is sent to this app. So in this way, the application can steal it and send it to remote attack vector. So to prevent this, what is the solution? So there can be a simple check in the application, like we can set auto verify true, and one more thing we'll need to do is basically whatever the host and scheme we are sending, right, we need to register the well-known asset links on the website as well. So once that's being set, what will happen, the Android system will verify, okay, this deep link can only be opened by our this application, no other application should open and be given priority to that. So now these were the two attack vectors which required spoofing. So now moving to other attack vectors. Next we'll discuss on exported web view. So here let's see the manifest for YouTube here. Yeah. So as we see, we have this YouTube viewer activity, and this is this is using an URL as an youtube.com URL to load inside it. But what it's actually also expecting is an intent URL. So what we can do, we can pass our intent URL as in any URL that we want to open, and this application will open it. This is happening because in if get intent, right, this check if condition, we are expecting that get intent should have an intent URL. If there is, we can load this URL as well in the web view. So now let's see the exploit application, how it's using this exported So in exploit application, what we are setting is we are setting the class name and package name. So we tell this is an application package, and we tell the class name, and because they are exported, right, so we can open this and pass an our intent URL. So we are basically passing a JavaScript prompt as in to prove the accesses. So let's see the demo for this as well. So we need to see the exploit for exported accesses. So now once we click on this exported accesses, as we see, we get enter password prompt. So this was possible because of two things. First one was the intent that we passed, and other thing that was being used, as we have also discussed, like JavaScript enabled, was set to true. So this is a flag that if your application is not using or it's not required, right, we should avoid this flag. Next, we are again using an exploit for accesses, but this time our method will be different. This time we are using the second activity, that is So this time we are using our second activity, that is reading blog post or blog viewer. So this basically opens a Medium link, but let's see the behind the scenes. So in the background, what it's expecting is, it is expecting if any extra or if any intent is being received, it's check for that. If there is an intent for this, if there is no intent, or let's say there is no intent received, so it will automatically open medium.com. But if the intent has a URL parameter, right, then it allows loading it in the vulnerable web view. Now let's see the manifest for this. In the manifest for blog viewer, what we can see is it's expecting a deep link. So there are two deep links basically on HTTP and HTTPS, but with same host. So if an application malicious application have the same deep link registered, they can also invoke this. Or if I pass this simply in a browser as well, right, the application will open this. So let's see in the exploit application. So in the exploit application, what we are doing is, so in exploit application we are passing medium.com proper deep link, then we are passing URL parameter which has the JavaScript prompt. So because the blog viewer accept our deep link, it expects the URL to be sent, we can open this and actually create a exploit for this as well. Now let's see the exploit. This is deep link accesses. We have medium.com URL and we are passing JavaScript prompt. As we see, we get the prompt for enter passwords. Now till now we have seen exploit on WebView, we had seen on deep link. Now let's come to exploitation based on files. So files are really very critical things, because files can be internal and you don't want them to be public, but there are ways in which we can steal them as well. So let's see the methods. So first let's store any note, as in let's say this is secret file cannot access. Let's save this. So this is saved in examples files.txt, right? This seems very secure, but we are going to demonstrate two ways how we can steal this. The first one is using WebView. So if you remember, in YouTube viewer we had two settings. So first one is allowing file access, second is allow file access from file URLs. Now both these two settings are really interesting. The first settings allow you to load a file URL in your WebView, and the second one allows you to load a file URL from a file protocol. So example of this is when you load a file, let's say file SD card abcd.html, and from that HTML page you want to query another file like an XHR request. So you can also do that if the setting is being enabled. So now let's see how we can actually exploit it. So we had seen, right, using YouTube viewer we are able to call our malicious payload. So in exploit application exported WebView, we were able to call this intent URL. But as we said, right, we can also call a file URL. So we can call a file URL basically to load a file content. Now loading this file content, we can also steal the data that was saved in file example.txt. Now let's see how. Let's because we were able to use this setting, set allow file access from file URL. So now I can query this file URL, basically the save file, the secured or internal file, and send it to remote attack vector. How am I doing this? Once this HTML page loads, on loading this I call send me files URL function. This function basically opens an XML HTTP request, which first get the response of this file and then appends this response to this webhook. So I have opened this webhook here. So this was an earlier. Now let's see the new one. I think our new is secret file cannot access. So let's see the exploit for this. So this is WebView file stream. Once we click on this, we get file sent to server. Let's check the server. So here we get it, secret file cannot access. So this was an attack using WebView, how we could steal file. Now let's see of stealing file by simply using an component that can start an activity. So let's move to routing activity. So if you see this activity, what it does is it receives parse level extra, as in it will receive the user intent. It will parse it and start a new activity based on that. And because if you see manifest, if you see the routing activity, we can say this is exported. This is exported set to true. So any application can open this. Any application will be able to open this and pass the router component. So let's see how we can actually get the file from this. But before that, let's see an important component that you talked earlier, that was content provider. So our application has implemented a content provider. Basically implementing this, it has set exported at set to false. So you cannot in any way directly call this provider because it is not exported. So this attack vector seems to be small, but because we have routing activity set which accepts any intent to be passed, we can actually exploit this. So also a small vulnerable thing that we have set in provider path that is root access. So there is full access to the data directory, as in data package directory. Now let's move to the exploit, like how have we built the exploit. So there are two parts to this. The first part is sending the intent. So as we know, like routing activity was exported and it accepts intent. So we are passing our built intent extra. So extra intent, what it does is it uses here we have, what we are doing is we are passing our class name like com notify world.exploit files display, hey, this activity, and we are passing the content provider as well. Now let's see what exactly we are doing using this intent. Upon opening this intent, we pass the URI, that is root. As you see, root, this was the path, basically all paths. So we have entered root path. Now we check for data com.world.application file example.txt. We see that we pass that URI, and because content provider the file provider is using this like the path, and we are using the routing activity to process the intent, our exploit will be successfully be able to read this. Now let's see the demo for this as well. Now let's click on file steal 2. Like this is the activity for stealing the file using the routing component. As you see, we get the contents of example.txt like secret file cannot access. This is on the exploit application. Now we have seen exploiting web views, exploiting files, using deep links. Now let's come to a final exploit, that is executing command injection. So in world.application, if you would see, we have a check root status. So this check if the condition of the device is rooted or not. So if you click, you will see device is rooted on if you are using emulator, but if you are using a real device, it will say device is not rooted, because the root detection logic is simple. Here what we are doing is we are running get runtime execute su command, and if it is being executed successfully, we tell the device is rooted. If it is not, we tell device is not rooted. But here is also a catch to this, as in we also expect that you can pass a command. So because we expect that you can pass a command, we expect that any activity from this can pass the command parameter extra, and we'll process that as well and set in the value if you want. But if you see root detection and if you see manifest in the root detection, here you see you won't be able to find that this is exported, this is not exported. But in earlier file stealing case, what we have seen, the routing component here, the router intent was exported. So we'll again use this as well in the exploit application. So we'll open command execution, and we can see we are doing the same thing again. We are passing the routing activity and extra intent with root detection class name and a command named whoami. So because this was again exported, and we were able to get intent because of these two reasons, we are able to execute command from cross application. Let's see. We are executing who am I on this. So we see UA00101. So this is the name for the user for the application. So with the exploits now being over, we come to end of the talk. So some of these references, the first one is developer documentation. This is a really nice place, like even if you are a beginner, you can refer developer documentation and learn things from there. Second is oversecure.com. So oversecure.com has a really nice collection of blogs where even if you have a beginner knowledge, right, or even if you don't know attack vectors, you can learn from like various blogs they have. So with this we come to end of talk. I hope this would have been a learning session for you, and I hope you have enjoyed this. For any doubts and questions, you can always ping me on Twitter. I'll be happy to answer those. So with this, I'll take your leave and stay safe. Keep hacking. Bye bye.
Thank you for joining Red Team Village at ActivityCon today. Our next speaker is Pankaj, and he will be covering mapping and conquering application security over the cloud. Don't forget to join us in our channel on the HackerOne Discord server. Thank you for joining the Red Team Village at ActivityCon today. Our next speaker is Pankaj, and he will be covering mapping and conquering application security over the cloud. Don't forget to join us in our channel on the HackerOne Discord server.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking your time to attend this talk, and I hope that I'll be able to make this talk an informational talk, and we all learn something together here. So I welcome you again. Welcome you all to my talk, that is map and conquer application security over cloud. Basically, we will be talking about an exciting domain here, that how you secure your applications, or you can say web applications, onto the cloud. And especially if you are bug bounty people, because I'm assuming my most of the audience will be from HackerOne community, or maybe Red Team Village. So if you are interested into red teaming, or maybe you are interested into bug bounties or breaking applications, then this talk is for you. But yes, because mainly I will be talking about how you secure the cloud, how you secure your application onto the cloud. But we'll also be discussing few misconfigurations, which if you see these cloud services being used, you can look for those misconfigurations to exploit your to find bugs, or maybe to get a bounty or something. Yeah. So this is me, Pankaj Maurya, and I work as a security analyst at AppSeco. Just let me check thing. Yeah. And this is my Twitter handle, Pankaj Maurya _. In case you have any doubt after this talk, please feel free to reach out to me. Or if you want to add something to these slides, then please again reach out to me. And again, I have already given this talk at B-Sides Newcastle a few days back, and there's not been much change. But yes, I'm definitely planning to add. Basically, I'm still doing my research, and I'm definitely planning to add more content. Or you can say, if not, then I will definitely be publishing a blog post around it. So moving ahead, so how I'll be breaking the next few minutes. We'll start with a modern application. We'll discuss about what this application is, and then we'll also discuss about what architecture this application follows. Let's say if you deploy, if you if you are planning to develop an application, obviously you will have an architecture around it. And in this talk, I'll be mainly focusing on AWS service provider. So we'll discuss how what AWS services are being used in this application, and then we'll talk about you can say okay, yeah, then we'll talk about what are the what are the AWS services which we can leverage to protect this particular application from potential security vulnerabilities. And then we will start with the OWASP top 10 mapping, and in this we'll talk about all the potential vulnerabilities against which we need to secure our app. And then we'll map AWS security services with these potential these OWASP top 10 risks, you can say. And then we'll discuss that if we are able to secure our application properly or not. Okay, so we'll start with shared responsibility model. Basically, the main reason to mention this is that this particular model helps us to balance the security between the security between the customers, or you can say consumers, and the cloud service providers, so that we understand what part of the application, or you can say what part of the whole from data layer to physical layer we need to secure as a customer, and what is the responsibility of a cloud service provider. Today, if the era we are living in, we use as either platform as a service, maybe software as a service. If you are still old school person, then you may be still using all these physical bare metal devices, which I don't think anybody might be using. But still, in this talk we'll be talking about only platform as a service and software as a service. If you see a lot of things, like the from application or from the OS layer till physical layer, things are being handled by our cloud service providers. Let's say in this case we have AWS. But still, if you talk about the difference, then the scope has reduced. Let's say there is minimum management of the servers, there is less network troubleshoot. It can be in terms of the hard wiring and all, your LAN cables and all. And then there is no bare metal expenses and multiple other things which you can talk about. but we still need to secure, I mean, even though a lot of things are being handled by our cloud service providers, we still need to secure, we still need to manage identity and access. We need to secure our code, our application code, you can say. We need to secure the storage, the database, it can be S3 also. We need to monitor any event or any data flow. Let's say, there is an unauthorized attempt to our application, then you definitely need to have something to monitor that. True, right? Yeah. So let's move ahead. I mean, this is how the modern stack is and what things we need to secure. And then we'll be talking about 3 different components, and they are really important. And these are, this talk is little scripted by me, and I have also taken reference from multiple other talks from reInvent and I guess Reinforce. But yes, I was able to come across these three important, components, you can say, which you can think of while you are planning to deploy, or you can say you are planning to deploy a secure application or build a secure application. So starting with security domains, we'll basically start with security domains, and then we'll talk about, our important assets in the application. And then we'll talk about all the AWS services which we can, use to protect these assets inside these security domains. And then we will discuss about this all things. And then, okay, moving ahead. Okay, this time, I guess this is the time where I introduce you all to the mythical MyFits. It's a AWS modern, based modern application. And its code is available on the GitHub. I'll just not browse it right now just to save my time. And you can just go ahead and clone the repo, and you can, follow the instruction which AWS has on their own documentation. AWS basically has its own documentation. You can just follow it and deploy the whole application, and it will start working as you want. Just to introduce that what this application is, if you go to mythicalmyfits.com, you will see an application which will have this banner, particular banner, Mythical MyFits. You see these mythical creatures here. Basically, this is an application where you can go and, if you have a big heart, or if you like these creatures, you can just go and adopt these creatures. Basically, you have to find home for these people. So you can just go ahead and adopt these creatures, and you can also like them. This application also has a feature to register and log in for the users. And I guess that's all. So I hope that you know what this application is. We will be using this particular application, or you can say I will be taking the example of this application throughout my talk. So if you talk about the architecture of this application, I mean, how this application is being mapped, or how this application is using all the AWS services, you will see that there is something called a static web content, where the whole code is deployed, I guess, S3 bucket. And then we have this application has something called user clicks. The number of times a particular user likes a particular creature, the Amazon API gateway is being used, and then whole analysis is being done using, I guess, Amazon Kinesis here. And then we have MyFits API, which goes via Amazon API gateway, and it goes, and then, basically all the APIs are being authorized, and by using Amazon Cognito authorizer. We'll talk about all these things. And then we also have the application is also using, CI/CD pipelines, and maybe it is also using DynamoDB here. We won't be talking about, AWS code build, pipeline, code commit, and all in this talk. But yeah, we'll stick to Amazon API gateway, Lambda function being used, S3 and Cognito, and maybe DynamoDB also I'll cover it. So we have, okay, starting with the security domains. So we'll discuss, what security domains we can think of if we are planning to build an application, or we are planning to deploy an application into the cloud, which we want, to be fairly secure. So starting with the, security domains, we all have our data. I mean, the whole application or whatever you're planning, that will be your data. And then you need to have something called identity and access management, or you can say identity and access, where you will manage, the authentication and the authorization. And then we have our code, the application code itself, which we again, need to secure, because this is one of the category which you don't want to lose, or, don't want to do any misconfiguration there. And then we have logging and monitoring. where again we need to have something which I earlier mentioned, that we need to have something called logging or some monitoring, so that we know that what unauthorized attempt or brute force is being done. And then we have infrastructure. Obviously we are not here talking about the bare metal or the network and the whole backend thing, or you can say the hardware thing. We're talking about maybe the DNS records. If you're using your application is using domain name, it may be using DNS service in AWS, that is Route 53. So we'll talk about those things. So let's start with the important okay, we have defined our security domains. Let's start with the important assets. Now that we know that we have categorized our security domains, now we'll discuss about what are important assets our application has. So assets, yeah, we'll have our PII data. We'll have our PII data. When I say, I mean basically means that if because in Mythical MyFits, this application allows the users to register themselves, and if they are registering, they must be using their name, they maybe their phone number, their email address, and multiple other things. So if that is considered a PII data. And then we have our Mythical MyFits creatures, are those important creatures which you will be adopting if you visit the MyFits, Mythical MyFits application. And then we have our code of the application, which is again an important asset. We can't lose the code here. And then we have likes. I mean, this application has this feature where you can go ahead and like a particular creature. And then we have, I mean, in this case, Mythical MyFit doesn't have a financial data or it doesn't process any financial data. But in case you have, because most of the application these days does process some kind of financial data. If you are using or storing secrets or maybe credit card details, then you should consider this as an important asset. Now we know what are our important assets. We'll discuss about what AWS services will be using these important assets. So in this case, let's say our infrastructure may be Route 53, and then we have our PII data for access control, which can be used by, or which can be managed by Cognito, Amazon Cognito. And then we have Amazon S3, where our static content will be present. And then we have our API gateway. I mean, all the last three services, whether it is API gateway, Lambda, or DynamoDB, they will all have or some interaction with the PII, Mythical MyFits creature, the code, the likes, all the logic. I mean, if you remember the architecture of the Mythical MyFits, you will remember that the application was using Cognito S3, API, Lambda, and DynamoDB. So this is based on that particular application, that is Mythical MyFits. Now we know what are we have categorized our security domains, and then we have categorized our important assets, or you can say identified our important assets. Now we also know what AWS services will be using these things. So we have this question here, that have you configured your services perfectly? I mean, there is nothing like perfect, but this question just means that have you configured all these AWS services perfectly? So we will discuss. Okay, that's what we'll be discussing about in the next few minutes or next few slides. Yeah. So yeah. So I just wanted to introduce you people to the latest release of OWASP, that is 2021 version. OWASP Top 10, that is 2021 version. Although it's not final yet, but still we should be aware about what are the changes upcoming. And if you are not aware about, and then I hope that this will be a new news for you. And we will here be talking about 2017 OWASP Top 10 risk. Basically, if you're not familiar about what is OWASP Top 10, you can say these are the top 10 security risks which are collated in a way that all the standards, or maybe organizations or corporate use this while they are, if it is a consulting company, they must be using it as a reference to categorize their vulnerabilities, or their all the vulnerabilities which they found. So it's a kind of top 10 risks which have been collated into a table. And we will be also referring to this 2017 version of this OWASP Top 10. And we won't be talking about 2021 because I mean, when I made the slides, this was not available. or you can say I was not aware about these top 10 2021. So just to make sure that you know, A1 is injection, and then we have A10, which is insufficient logging and monitoring. If you glance through this, you will just to give you an idea, okay, what we'll be talking about in the next future slides. Okay, so moving ahead. Now we are mapping here our top 10 with the security domains. We already know our security domains. We will map these OWASP top 10 with these security domains just to identify that if we are able to categorize properly. So we have our broken authentication and broken access control in identity and access management. And then we have our code, which will have, which may have missing, insufficient validation. It may have, it might not be doing the sanitization of the code, or and that can result into excesses or cross-site scripting. It can have insecure deserialization. It can have, your application may be using, your code may be using third-party libraries. That is it. So we can see that it can be, using components with non-vulnerability. And then we have logging and monitoring. Oh, before that we have our data. That is, our data can be vulnerable to sensitive exposure or even leakage, you can say. So we also cover our A3. And then we have infrastructure, where we again say using components with non-vulnerability. I'll talk about this one. There may be an edge case which I wanted to mention here, but yes. Logging and monitoring, we have security misconfiguration and then insufficient logging and monitoring. So we'll be discussing about all these top 10 and how we are mapping them individually. So moving ahead, just to give you a high level idea of, what this looks like, or what can be our requirements if you map these, OWASP top 10 with the, our security domains. So, what can be requirement in terms of identity and access, just like we discussed in the previous slide, that we need to have some kind of authentication and authorization. So that is there. And then we have a code. We can have, input validation related vulnerability, or maybe our secret is being leaked into code. Maybe we are using third-party libraries that can be dependency vulnerabilities. We have our encryption here. We, in terms of data, we do need to encrypt our data. And then we have our infrastructure, that is, we should have some kind of WAF, that is web application firewall. And then we have our logging and monitoring. Again, it can be CloudWatch, CloudTrail, or maybe X-Ray. These are, few of them are, AWS services. If you're not aware about it, we will be discussing in the next slides. So starting with, identity and access. Now we will be individually talking about all these security domains and how we are, mapping and leveraging the AWS services, and what can be the misconfigurations, all of them into one this talk. So I've already, set the whole plot. Now we will be discussing about the core part here. So what can be a requirement, in terms of identity and access management, if you are planning to deploy an application into the cloud. So we need to have, some kind of authentication, maybe some kind of authorization. And if you are using, AWS services, then you need to have some kind of access control between the backend services. True, right? So yeah, let's see what AWS services we can leverage to fulfill those requirements. So we have our Cognito here. Let's start with the API gateway. That will be more useful. So API gateway has a section where you can basically, API gateway is a kind of wall between your you can say your user and then your backend AWS backend services. So basically API gateway can be used to create REST APIs. You can say if your application is heavily using or needs to use REST APIs, then you can use API gateway. API gateway has a section called authorization, where it can be used to manage the authorization of the APIs. And then it has two features or maybe service, which is you can use Amazon Cognito user pool authorizer, or maybe Lambda custom authorizer. In our case, in case of Mythical MyFeeds, our application using Amazon Cognito user pool authorizer. If you remember that architecture, there was this one arrow going upwards towards Cognito, where it was mentioned authorizer. You can just go ahead into the previous slide whenever you are done after this talk, and you can visit this. And then we have our Cognito. Cognito, in case you are you are not using API gateway, you can totally depend upon the Cognito. Cognito has something called user pools and identity pools. User pools can act like an authenticator. I mean, they store the whole user directory, or you can say they act like a user directory. And then we have identity pools, which can be used for authorization. Basically, you can assign roles to both authenticated and unauthenticated users. And then we have access control between services. That is, if you talk about the access control between services, we have AWS Lambda, which has further invocation permissions and execution permissions. So if you see that we have mapped broken authentication and broken access control of OWASP top-10, and we also know what AWS services which we can use to fulfill these requirements. I mean, if you're looking to counter the broken authentication or maybe broken access control, then we can use Cognito API Gateway and AWS Lambda to prevent such potential issues or security risks. There are few links to the video. I guess I duplicated one single YouTube link, but that's okay. And there is also documentation around Cognito custom scopes API gateway, which you can use to see how people use Amazon Cognito user pool authorizer and all. And then let's talk about what can go wrong. I mean, if you are using AWS services, what misconfigurations a human can do, or what misconfiguration you can come across in case you are dealing with these cloud-based applications. Okay. So starting with misconfigured AWS Cognito attributes. Okay. So what happens that Cognito, AWS Cognito, you can say Amazon Cognito has something called attributes, which can be given either read or write permissions. And these attributes, can be used to manage access control. And now if you have created a custom attribute, and if you've given that particular attribute a kind of access control, if you're using that particular attribute to manage to do access control, and if you've given that particular attribute a write access, then maybe a low privilege user can, if you see this image, a low privilege user who has some access token because he has some low privilege access to your application, they can use the API update user attributes, and then they can elevate their privileges to an admin by just using the parameters like name, and then they can pass that custom attribute and then the value and the role name. So if they do that, they may be, they might become an admin level user. Just to mention that how this looks like. So if you open Cognito, you will see writable attributes. Under that, if you have a custom attribute, and if you have checked it, then it means that you have enabled write access for a particular attribute, which you are using to manage access control. Then we have misconfigured AWS Cognito profile self-registration. Again, in the Amazon Cognito dashboard, there is a section which we basically there's a section which says policies. Under that, you have option to allow either admins to manage registration, or maybe to allow users to do self-registration. If you have kept the settings default, and if you have or you can say if you have enabled self-registration, then users, or you can say malicious users, if they have your client ID, they can just use the sign up API, and then they can pass their username and password like in the third image, and they can become a user, and they can further use the confirm sign up API to confirm their registration on the platform, or you can say on your application. I mean, this is how in the 50 image, this is how it looks like if you keep the setting allow users to sign themselves up. So if you are configuring, please remember to make sure that you only allow the administrators to create users, unless you need these people, you want the people to sign up themselves. And then we have identity, hard-coded identity pool ID in HTTP response. About these two, I have already written a blog. I mean, at AppSocket, we have written a blog post where it covers, complete from a sample application to how you deploy it, and then how you configure it, and then, what misconfigurations or weak configurations which you can exploit or come around. So just go ahead in the link below, blog.appsoko exploiting weak configuration in Amazon Cognito in AWS, and you will find it. And then we have granting Lambda invoke permissions to service principal without specifying the source. This is a basically very Lambda specific thing where you do not grant, do not specifically mention particular source ARN, and you only mention or let's say give permission to a service principal. And in that case, what happens that in an organization, if there are other AWS accounts, then they may be able to invoke your Lambda function and use them. So these are the few misconfigurations, or you can say things which can go wrong. So I hope that now we know that in terms of IAM, we know what is a requirement, that is authenticate, authorize, and access, and then we know what AWS services which we can use to fulfill this requirement, and then we also know that what configurations or misconfigurations we can do or come around. So yeah. Next, we have requirement for a secure application in terms of code. I mean, our application may have input validation requirement. We basically need to validate the input, and then we may have secrets in source code. Again, we want to manage so that we don't leak any secret in source code. We can have, our application might be using depending on third-party libraries, so there may be dependency vulnerabilities. And then we have okay, let's talk about what AWS services now we can use to fulfill these requirements. In terms of input validation, if you see, we have in AWS, we have something called WAF, Web Application Firewall. There are conditions like SQL injection rule and accesses, and there are multiple other things which, but in this talk, the scope is only limited to these two, and we can use them, and they, this WAF, AWS WAF does a fair job in protecting against, SQL injection and accesses rules. And then we have our API gateway, which has something called request validation. Basically, again, if you remember, I mentioned about that API gateway. API gateway, acts as a wall between a user and the backend services. Same way, you can configure the API gateway, and it will validate the request. If the request doesn't follow the conditions which has been specified, then it will fail the request and may return with a 400 error. And it will also log that particular event into the or you can say into the CloudWatch, I guess. Yeah. And if you talk about that basic validation which is being done, it basically validates the request parameters, the query string, and you can say the URL, and maybe the headers which are being used, and it checks if they are included or if they are left blank. So if you see, we have covered our injection here. We know that what kind of SQL, what kind of injection vulnerabilities can be there, and then we know what kind of injection can be done, and then we have taken or used or leveraged AWS WAF or API gateway to again counter such security issues. We also, in terms of dependency vulnerabilities, for now I'm not aware about, or maybe I'm not aware about any services in AWS which can be used to fulfill this requirement. But yes, if your application is heavily dependent upon dependencies, or you can say third-party libraries, then the best practice would be to minimize the user dependencies. If you can't do that, then use tools like OWASP dependency check, or maybe dependency track, or you can use SANAC and npm audit and etc. There are multiple other tools in the market. Just go ahead and Google it. You will find a lot of tools. Use them to minimize the dependency related vulnerabilities. In terms of securing or storing secrets, we have in AWS something called AWS Secret Manager, and then we have AWS Lambda encrypted environment variables. I mean, they all do a fair job again. If you see, we have now covered our sensitive data exposure by ensuring that our secret is not leaked by using AWS Secret Manager. And then we have used, in case you're using third-party libraries, then we have also countered that using third-party, not AWS services. And we have also covered A9. In terms of 8, I would say insecure deserialization. I mean, again, most of the third-party libraries which we use to do deserialization, they themselves introduce, insecure deserialization related vulnerabilities. So again, the solution would be to, you can say the best practice would be to minimize the use of dependencies, or maybe use these third-party tools. And then, what can go wrong, or, what misconfigurations which you can come across. Maybe you will find the secret in your open source repositories. This is one of the, case which is found these days, and it's too much. and it really results in heavy data loss or breach. And then we have secret not encrypted with KMS, customer master keys. Or basically, if you're not using, encrypting your data or maybe secrets with some kind of encryption, and in AWS we have something called KMS, which is basically a key management service, which again uses CMK, and then further it uses DEKs to encrypt the data. So this is again a good practice to use KMS. And then if you are not rotating your secrets, then maybe if your secret is leaked, it may be used by the malicious user or attacker to use that secret and gain access to your maybe backend services or the application. Again, if you are heavily dependent upon dependencies, like in this case, our Mythical My Feeds is not that much dependent. So in case your application is requires too much third-party libraries, then again it would be a best practice to take care of these such dangerous dependencies. And then we have Lambda command injection. Basically, in this, what happens that if you are you can say if your function, or you should basically control all the user input, which interacts with the system calls, you can say OS level calls. You should try to minimize that particular thing. Oh, I guess my battery is low. So you should always try or prevent user controllable data to interact with from interacting from the, you can say, OS or system calls. So next we have is requirement for a secure application in terms of our data. I mean, we have our data, and what are the key requirements which we should have while deploy or building an application in terms of our data. I mean, our data should have some kind of security and some kind of privacy. It should have some encryption at rest. I mean, when the data is at rest, or encryption in transit. We should have data backup and replication. So now we will talk about requirements for secure application in terms of our data. I mean, our data also should have some kind of data security, data privacy. It should have, our data should be encrypted at rest. It should be encrypted in transit. We should have data backup and replication. So let's talk about, the AWS services which we can use to, fulfill these requirements. And in this case, we have, for encryption at rest, we have KMS. KMS basically is, again, I mean, as I earlier mentioned, that it is a key management system. I guess it's a software or system. That's okay. In this we have multiple algorithms, both asymmetric and symmetric. And then there are two types of encryption, that is server-side encryption and client-side encryptions. You can follow, you can use whatever you want based on the requirements you have. And then we have encryption at rest. In this case, we have API gateway. That is, I mean, by default, API gateway only exposes the HTTPS endpoints. So you don't need to worry about if you're using API gateway. Then we also have Amazon Certificate Manager in AWS, which easily provisions TLS SSL certificates, so that you can use that also. And just to mention about KMS, and I always give this example about KMS. I mean, the need of encrypting your data at rest. I mean, let's assume that you have some data in your S3 bucket, which is really critical, and some crazy person, just went ahead and made that particular public, having that critical data or objects public. So if that bucket is public now, anybody who has knowledge about the bucket URL, they can just browse to that particular URL, and they can access the objects or the information inside the bucket. But if you would have used KMS, then even though the application, the bucket is made public, the malicious user or the user on the internet won't be able to use that particular, you can say, or maybe not be able to access that particular data, because it will be encrypted and they need something to decrypt it. And then we have data backup, replication. I mean, in S3 we have something called CRR, cross region replication. And then we have, you can use snapshots of instances, and there are multiple other ways. And then we have data security. For data security and privacy, we have Amazon Messi. It's an intelligent tool which uses, machine learning and pattern matching kind of things. It can protect your PI data, that like the name, I guess email address, or maybe your credentials and all. basically it protects your PI data, so it can be anything inside PI. It can be Messi can be helpful with that, helpful for that. And then what misconfigurations or what can go wrong here. Maybe you may make your bucket public, or maybe allow read access to your bucket anonymously. I mean, anybody who has, basically you may, I mean, if you see this image here, if you make your bucket public and you put it principal as star, then, and you don't, if you do not define any particular condition, or where you specify a particular IP or something, then anybody who knows this particular S3 bucket can access or can read the data. Same way goes for the S3 bucket users write access. I mean, in this case, if you allow the principal to be star, again anybody who has any anonymous user can just go ahead and write onto your bucket. So make sure that you follow the process of least privilege, where you only allow access to particular people, and you only allow limited access. Like in this case, if you only need the write access, then there's no point of giving a get object or any other action. So in this case, if you see the second image, there is get object. If you only need permissions for write access, then just go ahead with put object. I mean, kind of things. There are long stories which I can talk about it. So for this talk, this is what I wanted to mention. And then we can have, there is something called S3 directory traversal. If I haven't mentioned in my previous slide, there is this application which is called application security, which I guess which is with the name Contra, and these people have really good AWS top 10 based security vulnerabilities, or you can say labs around it. You can just go ahead and practice what is directory traversal in terms of your application onto the cloud, or you can say in terms of cloud. And also just to mention that these screenshots have been taken from application.security website. So just wanted to mention this. And then we have S3 object unsigned URLs. I mean, if you're if you're using S3 objects and then your objects are not signed, so anybody can just any malicious user or any user on the internet can just browse to your URLs, and they can access your objects. If they are signed, basically signed URLs have some limited access, some limited time for which they are valid, and once the time overs, you can't access that particular URL because it's not valid anymore. Then we have a requirement for a secure application. In terms of infrastructure, we do need DDoS protection, rate limiting, and also I just wanted to mention about subdomain takeover. These people are talking about on Twitter and all. So yeah, these are our requirements here in terms of infrastructure. So against DDoS protection, we have AWS Shield Standard and AWS Shield Advanced. The difference between standard and advanced is, I mean, you can just go ahead and Google. AWS has a beautiful documentation around it, but just to mention that standard only protects layer 3, I mean the OSI layer 3 and 4, and AWS Shield protects layer 7, that is your application layer also. So you can use DDoS protection, you can use AWS Shield for that. And then we have API Gateway. Again, API Gateway has, just like all the other features, API Gateway has something called some features where you can throttle the API requests, both at a account level and at a API stage level. I do have mentioned the references, I mean the links to these particular topics which I'm mentioning here. You can just go ahead and read after this talk. And then we have AWS WAF. You can block the IPs geographically. You can use some rate-based tools. There is IP reputation where you can block a particular IP based on the behavior. Yeah, I guess that's the thing about IP reputation, I guess. And then we have what can go wrong in terms of infrastructure thing. So we have subdomain takeover here. I wanted to mention about this particular subdomain takeover because I did read a lot of blog posts around it, and then also I saw one Twitter thread recently. So basically, if you are using a AWS DNS based service, let's say Route 3, and you are using S3 bucket with the same domain name or subdomain, let's say, and let's say you accidentally deleted that S3 bucket, And if anybody now, browses or navigates to that particular URL, let's say in this case we have asset.cloudbilling.net, then they will see such error or such message that is 404 not found. It will say that the specified bucket does not exist, which will basically give an idea to a person that there is no bucket of this name. And in S3 all the buckets are unique, so if there is no bucket with that particular name, you can just go ahead and create a name with the same subdomain or domain, and then you can say that you have taken over the subdomain. Yeah, I mean, that's how it works. So make sure that you always delete the entry in your DNS service, and if you're deleting your S3 bucket, and if you don't require that particular domain or subdomain anymore. Okay, then we have our logging and monitoring. I guess this is the last one. In this, we have requirement like we do need to have application logs, we need to have access logs, we need to have alarms and compliance validations. So for all these things in AWS, we have for compliance, we have AWS config. AWS config is a really cool, I would say, service. It has a bunch of features. Two key features in this, in terms of this talk, would be that it acts as inventory. So it gives a detailed information about what resources are being used by this particular service or something. And then it also allows you to do to follow compliance. You can say it has rules like whether your application, or you can say your service, follows a compliance or not based on the rules, I guess. I mean, that's how it has. I just do not remember. I mean, it's been a while I have used this. And then we have AWS CloudTrail here. AWS CloudTrail kinds of records an event. It doesn't monitor because that's part of CloudWatch that we'll talk about in the logging. CloudTrail you can use to track the events. Let's say that there is an unauthorized attempt, or there is an excessive usage of wrong credentials. So you can track those events inside AWS CloudTrail. In order to do real-time monitoring of these things, you can use CloudWatch. You can use API Gateway access logs or execution logs. They all work differently. And hence we have also covered our 8N insufficient logging and monitoring. And now if you see that we have, we know our security domains. I mean, one of the best practice would be to identify your security domain, then to identify your assets. And once you are done with that, then you map your top 10 security risks with these, AWS services. And you know that which AWS services will help you to counter that particular security domain, or to protect against potential vulnerabilities in that security domain. So yeah, just to mention that what can go wrong here in terms of infrastructure, if you in terms of logging and monitoring, if you have not enabled logging and monitoring, then obviously if an attack happens, then it may be too late to identify that particular attacker, or maybe the attacker might have already become a part of the application or might have infected the code. So it's always a best practice to enable logging and monitoring. So yeah, that's all. Okay, so any questions? You can just post your question in the wherever you have the option to post your questions. So just go ahead and post your questions. I'll try to answer them. And yeah, that's all. So meanwhile, you think about the questions. I'll just say these are the references. And thank you, HackerOne and the Red Team Village for this opportunity. And thank you, audience, for listening to me. This is my personal website, that is pankajmaurya.com. This is my Twitter handle, pankajmaurya_. And then we have Pankaj Maurya, my LinkedIn username, and my email address in case you want to reach out to me. So thank you. Please go ahead and ask your questions if you have any. Thank you.